On the morning of September 28, 2025, worshippers gathered inside a quiet church in Grand Blanc Township, Michigan. For them, it was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday, a day of prayer, peace, and community. But within moments, their place of worship turned into a scene of chaos and terror. A man drove a truck into the chapel, opened fire on the congregation, and even set parts of the building on fire. By the end of that morning, 4 people were dead, more than a dozen were injured, and an entire community was left shattered. The suspect, a 40-year-old former Marine named Jacob Sanford, would himself be killed in a confrontation with police. But the questions remain. Why did he do it? What pushed him to attack a house of worship? And what does this tragedy reveal about deeper tensions within American society? This is the full story of the Michigan church shooting of 2025. A case that has shaken not only Michigan but the entire nation. Grand Blanc Township is a suburban community just south of Flint, Michigan. Known for its quiet neighborhoods, small businesses, and family-oriented atmosphere, it is not the kind of place where people expect violent crime to occur, let alone inside a church. The chapel where the attack took place belonged to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as the Mormon Church. For decades, the congregation had been a peaceful gathering spot where families came together for Sunday services, weddings, and community activities. On that September morning, the congregation had gathered like usual. Children were attending classes, families were filling pews, and the choir was preparing to sing. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But just outside, something sinister was brewing. The attacker was identified as Jacob Sanford, a 40-year-old former U.S. Marine. Sanford was not an unknown figure in the community. Some people described him as troubled, others as unpredictable. After serving in the military, Sanford struggled to adjust to civilian life. Reports suggest he had experienced multiple personal setbacks, including financial difficulties, failed relationships, and increasing isolation. Authorities would later investigate whether Sanford harbored anti-Mormon views, as early evidence suggested he had spoken critically of the church. But was this attack motivated by religious hatred, personal demons, or something more complex? At the time, nobody in that chapel could have known that Sanford was about to unleash violence on them. It was just before 10:30 a.m. when the service began. Families filled the pews, children sat with their parents, and the pastor welcomed the congregation. Then, without warning, Sanford's truck crashed through the outer wall of the chapel, sending debris flying and stunning those inside. Witnesses described a thunderous noise, followed by screams and panic. Before anyone could process what had happened, Sanford climbed out of the vehicle armed with a firearm. He began firing into the crowd, targeting worshippers who were too shocked to move. Panic swept the building. Some people ducked for cover under pews, others ran for exits, and parents shielded their children. Amid the chaos, Sanford allegedly set parts of the building on fire, adding another layer of terror to the unfolding nightmare. One survivor later told reporters, "It felt unreal. One second we were singing hymns, the next second people were screaming, smoke was filling the room, and there was nowhere safe to run." Within minutes, frantic 911 calls poured in. Dispatchers could hear gunshots and terrified screams in the background. Police officers and emergency responders rushed to the scene. When law enforcement arrived, they confronted Sanford inside the burning building. A tense standoff followed, but police quickly neutralized the threat. Sanford was shot and killed on the spot, ending the rampage. But the damage was already done. 4 people were dead, at least 8 more had been injured by gunfire, and several others suffered from smoke inhalation as flames spread through parts of the church. Firefighters worked to extinguish the blaze while paramedics treated the wounded. Survivors were escorted out of the building, many of them in tears, some in shock. Behind every statistic were real people. Families who had come to worship together now found themselves separated by tragedy. Among the victims were a young mother who had been sitting near the front pew, an elderly couple who had attended the church for decades, a teenager who had volunteered with the youth group. Their names became symbols of resilience and heartbreak. Candlelight vigils were soon held across the community. Neighbors left flowers and notes outside the charred remains of the chapel. One mourner said, "They were people of faith, people of kindness." To lose them in such a senseless way, it's something our community will never forget. In the days that followed, investigators worked around the clock to piece together Sanford's actions. They searched his home, reviewed his digital footprint, and interviewed friends, neighbors, and former colleagues. What emerged was a troubling portrait. Sanford had a history of instability and possible mental health struggles. He had also posted critical comments online about organized religion, specifically targeting the Mormon faith. While investigators did not immediately label the attack as terrorism, the possibility of a hate crime was strongly considered. Federal authorities joined local police in reviewing Sanford's background, looking for signs of extremist influences. So far, officials have said the motive remains under investigation, but they acknowledge that Sanford's military background, personal struggles, and potential religious hostility all played roles. The survivors' accounts shed light on the terrifying moments inside the church. One father recalled how he grabbed his daughter and pulled her under a pew as gunfire rang out. All I could think of was keeping her safe. I told her to stay quiet, not to move. We prayed that it would be over soon. Another survivor described the fire. The smoke was so thick, people were coughing and crying. Some couldn't see the exits. It was chaos. These personal stories highlight not only the fear of that day, but also the courage displayed by ordinary people. Some worshippers helped others escape, while others risked their lives to shield loved ones. The attack sparked nationwide outrage. Leaders from across the political spectrum condemned the violence. Religious groups offered prayers and solidarity. The President of the United States addressed the nation, calling the attack an assault on both faith and freedom. On social media, the hashtag #PrayForGrand Blanc trended as people shared condolences, prayers, and calls for unity. At the same time, debates erupted about the rise of domestic extremism, the safety of places of worship, and the lingering effects of untreated mental health issues among veterans. This attack raised difficult questions for America. Are houses of worship safe? From churches to synagogues and mosques, attacks on religious institutions have become a growing concern in recent years. What role did extremism play? Was Sanford motivated purely by personal struggles, or was he influenced by anti-Mormon sentiment and hate rhetoric online? How can communities heal? For Grand Blanc Township, the path forward will involve both grief and resilience. Experts warn that this case fits into a troubling trend of violent acts carried out by individuals with complex mixes of personal issues and extremist beliefs. Even as the investigation continues, many questions remain. Did Sanford plan this attack in advance? Were there warning signs that could have stopped him earlier? And most haunting of all, could this happen again in another community, in another house of worship? The Michigan church shooting of 2025 is more than just another crime story. It is a painful reminder that violence can strike even in places meant for peace and sanctuary. For the families of the victims, life will never be the same. For the survivors, the scars, both physical and emotional, will take years to heal. And for the broader American public, this case has once again raised urgent questions about faith, safety, and the root causes of violence. As investigators search for answers, one truth remains clear. What happened in Grand Blanc Township will not be forgotten. The church may rebuild, but the memory of that tragic Sunday will live on in the hearts of all who witnessed it.